Greetings YouTube, Sega Zombie here and welcome to a VR. This is a video response to David Retro Plays Games Badly. I'm loving these videos. I did a response to one a little while ago, really enjoying this one, so I thought I've had a bit of time, so I thought I'm going to shoot a video. And this is about 5 games that I have an emotional connection with. Wow, this is a challenge, this one, because I think in some ways the whole reason for collecting and gaming and retro in general is because you have that emotional attachment to the media. You know, it's really strange, you know, how people collect books and comics and, you know, collecting in general. Most of it, I think, or for me personally, it's down to picking up that object or playing that game or reading that book that sparks, or listening to a piece of music, it sparks in us some nostalgia, memories. They all come flooding back, and this has been a really tough one. I've chosen 5, and I think the best place to start is at the very beginning for me. I like to start at the beginning with all my tales, and this is going to be no different, guys. And we need to go way back to the really early 80s. And I can remember I was in primary school, and up until this point I was trying to think of this. My only connection really with video games was probably the likes of Space Invaders. There was a tabletop at my dad's work in the community sort of like bar that they had there, the social club. There was a couple of tabletop games there, and I can remember one which I think was Phoenix. I can remember that, and obviously there was Space Invaders, and obviously because we live right near the coast, we had Felixstowe, so you know I was forever playing in the arcades. But to actually get video games in the home, I think the first video game I actually really got, if you can call it that, are these sort of like LED, LCD tabletop games. You know the fare, I mean, that they were all the rage in the early 80s. And then they made a massive comeback in the 90s. I can remember Tiger Electronics bringing out loads of little LCD handheld games. So they were really popular as sort of gifts and presents back in the day. But yeah, the early 80s, it was the bigger tabletops like Caveman. And I can remember, and I really need to get this in my collection because I've misplaced it. But my first ever real game was a Donkey Kong clone called Kingman, released by Tomy. If I can, I'm going to put a picture up, guys, so you can just see what it is. But I thought I'd mention that because that's the very first game I believe that I had at home. But I can remember being at primary school, coming home from school, completely unaware of what was going to be in front of me. And I can remember walking into my living room, and my mum and dad had moved this old wooden desk into the corner of the living room, and there was set up a Sinclair Spectrum 48K. And from that moment on, seeing my dad playing a game on there, the first game I ever saw, I think it's called Jumping Jack Flash. Very, very basic line drawn game, and you've got to jump between the gaps, and I think you've got to get to the top of the screen. It's been a long time since I played it, but that was the first game I ever witnessed. And then my dad was really excited. He could see the joy in my face. I was just absolutely blown away by this, guys. And, you know, having something like this at home. And my dad was mega excited to show me this one particular game. And that was this. And that is 3D Death Chase. An absolutely amazing game. For those of you that have got absolutely no nostalgia to the Spectrum, or, you know, it's before your time, you're going to look at this and think, what on earth? But this game, its visuals, the sounds, everything to me, it captured that arcade sound, and the game played absolutely amazing. What a game. I can remember being hooked on this, just watching my dad play this game for hours on end, and I can remember just itching to have a turn. And yeah, this game for me just holds that many memories. You know, as the years went by, my dad wasn't really a gamer at all as such. He really enjoyed the Spectrum. He enjoys computers and the programming side of it back in them days. But this was one game that I do really remember me and my dad actually enjoying and playing together. And a great game. And I'm cheating a bit, guys, because I'm going to include another in this sort of Spectrum choice. And that is Attic Attack. And I can remember fondly my mum and my uncle that lived with us. I thought he was my older brother, but he wasn't. He was my uncle. But yeah, him and my mum were absolutely obsessed with this game, Attic Attack, by Ultimate Play the Game. And this was the very first game I ever finished. I can remember watching my mum and my uncle play this game for hours and hours on end. And I can remember I was ill off school. Can't remember what it was, but it was something quite serious. I was off school for a length of time. And I can remember just sitting there, and when I felt a bit better or well enough, I can remember really playing this game absolutely loads. And I was so obsessed with it that I actually finished it. And this is the first game I ever finished. So to me, it's got a real emotional attachment to it. And both these games, my first choice, two really early and classic Spectrum games that have got to be included in my 5. There's just no two ways about it. There's so many memories that come flooding back with those two games, and you know, whenever I load them up every now and again, it always takes me back. It always reminds me of the old house we had where we grew up when we was really young, and just everything about it comes back in my mind, and it's really an emotional two games. Those two games really are. And then moving on really, and it's sort of like a progression. The next one, it was 1986. I can remember I was 10 years old, and it was my very first, or it's the very first family holiday I remember. And we went to Butlins. I believe it was Skegness Butlins. But we went there on a family holiday. We also went with my mum and dad's best friends who had kids that were similar age to me and my sister. And I can remember going into the arcades and just hearing that music, thinking, wow, what is this? I can remember looking across the arcade, seeing a crowd of teenage lads all crowded round this big, huge, red Ferrari-shaped arcade machine. And yes, you've guessed it, guys, it's Outrun. And it's Outrun is the first game, really, that one, it reminds me of that fantastic family holiday that we had. But it also reminds me of that blue Sega writing. That was when I first realised that Sega was a company that done these games, and I've been obsessed ever since. So I'm only going to show off the actual original Sega game, Outrun games, guys. That I can remember the only reason I wanted a Master System was for Outrun, and I got it. Outrun on the Master System blew me away. I can remember my Spectrum, all the hype in the magazines, that Outrun was coming, it was being done. I can't remember the developer, but it was being done by a developer that had done faithful ports of other games. And I can remember being so disappointed with Outrun on the Spectrum. Now, the Spectrum is a limited computer. There's no way it could really do a faithful conversion of Outrun. It done its best, let's put it that way, but it just didn't feel like Outrun at all. And it wasn't until I got my Master System a couple of years later and the Sega obsession really started, guys. So we got Outrun there on the Master System, and then a couple of years after that we had Outrun on the Mega Drive, and then Outrun on the Sega Saturn. So, you know, all the Outrun series just continues for me. It's one of those games, it's got so many memories, but the standout one is that holiday, seeing that game for the first time in the arcades. And it just brings it all back. It brings back all of those memories. And it was my obsession, the beginnings of my obsession with Sega. So that's really, really significant to me. And then next up, we've got some games. Now, I can remember my mates at the time, going back to the Spectrum days and the Amiga, Atari ST, was side-scroll and beat-em-ups. Me and my mate Chris, we absolutely loved them. I was going to include some of those, but I thought no, because as we got older and you had more and more mates on the scene, and I can remember just all of us gathering in bedrooms and things like that to play this series of games. And what's significant with these series of games is I still play them today. And what's so great is I grew up with this series, and now my son is. My lad is also, he's not a massive retro gamer. No way is he massively he's a gamer. He isn't into retro games, but the one series of games that I can get him to play, and that has got to be this series of games, guys. The Streets of Rage games. Obviously, Streets of Rage 2 even is where it's at mostly. You know, that's the go-to game. And there hasn't been a game, a side-scroll and beater. You know, this was the peak of side-scroll and beaters, and I don't think it's ever been topped. This game's a perfect balance, and to play it like 30 years on just goes to show how amazing this game was. And it just reminds me of that freedom. It reminds me of a time when you had absolutely nothing to worry about, no stresses in life. The only thing that bothered you is when it was your turn on that joypad to play Streets of Rage. You know, and it reminds me of friends long gone, people that I haven't seen for many, many years. Whenever I play these games, all those memories come flooding back of summer holidays, you know, school holidays, the like, and just playing through these games. Streets of Rage has to be in there because it brings so many memories, so much nostalgia. Absolutely a fantastic series, and I have to include it. So I'm funnily enough to a series of games that it's a genre that's not really, you know, it's a genre I'll dabble in. There is certain titles that I enjoy playing. One in particular, this isn't the game, but there's one in particular title that I absolutely adore, and that's puzzle games. Puzzle games, some massive titles, and it's a genre that's just followed all the way through from the early days of the 8-bit micros all the way to today. You know, they're very popular. Most puzzle games now are incorporated in Facebook gaming and mobile phone gaming and all that. The likes of Candy Crush and things like that. But the one game series, and there was two I could have chosen here, slightly outside, and the reason I have not chosen this one probably is because I don't own it, and that is Tetris on the Game Boy. I can remember playing Tetris so much, and me and my two brothers, we were so competitive. And my middle brother, he wasn't really into games, but the one game he would play over and over, and he would nick our Game Boys, was Tetris. And we got so competitive. It was unbelievable. I can remember my brother taking the batteries out if he had got a high score and he didn't want us to beat him, and you know, he'd hide the Game Boys, or you know, he'd sit on the toilet for an hour playing Tetris. I can remember that. And also just playing Tetris so much that when I went to bed at night, I closed my eyes. I'm sure some of you guys will agree with me here, and you can see the Tetris shapes falling in your eyes. That's when you know you've played Tetris too much, guys. Really, seriously. So I was going to include Tetris, but I haven't. The puzzle I am going to mention and include is this one, and that is Bust a Move 2 Arcade Edition. Now, the version at the time, I believe, because I can remember I had my Sega Saturn from launch, and I was always into my Sega Saturn. But I can remember purchasing a PlayStation 1 solely to play Resident Evil 2. When I found out that Resident Evil 2 wasn't coming out on the Sega Saturn, I went out and I got a PlayStation. There was a few games on that I wanted to play. I played them, and then my PlayStation just went into the living room of our family home. It just sat in there, and my mum become obsessed with Buster Move 2, this edition. And I can remember it was at an age when I was in my late teens, possibly hitting my early 20s, just before the year or two before I left the family home. I can remember, I was more interested in going out, socialising, partying it up, going out with my mates. If I weren't drinking, I was on a hangover, basically. It's what it was like back then. And I can just remember my mates knocking on the door, or us going out, or just on a heavy session, coming home, and there'd be my mum in the living room playing Buster Move, itching for one of us to play 2-player head-to-head with her, because she absolutely loved this game. My mum still plays all these Facebook puzzle games today, and this is the one game that really reminds me of that time. I can remember having a steaming hangover or a massive come down, and just walking in through the front door, being greeted by my mum, 2 controllers, and just egging me or one of my mates to play her at Buster Move 2. And it was again a very family competitive game that we all got involved in, and you couldn't sit in our living room without playing around of Buster Move 2. And whenever I see this game and pick it up off the shelf, it just reminds me of all of those memories and that era, that time. Absolutely amazing. So Buster Move 2, it's got to go in my chosen 5. And then finally we're going to end it on a series of games that I just think you cannot ignore it. And what's difficult here is, it's another series of games that we're going way back to the late 80s, early 90s, and it's still with us today, and still a hugely popular series, and it is Street Fighter 2. Now, I can remember, absolutely, as you guys know, I was Mega Drive through and through, but we moved out of our family home. I can remember I was then getting ready to start my GCSEs at high school, and I can remember it was a massive upheaval. We moved house, and we moved from a big town into a little village, and I stuck with my high school in the town, and I can remember it just being a massive palaver. I was really down at that time in my life, and I can remember my dad going out and buying me a Super Nintendo just for Street Fighter 2. Now, I don't own that Super Nintendo pack bundle. I'm hoping one day I will. And I had it just for Street Fighter 2. I can remember I had also a few other games that were played, but predominantly the Mega Drive ruled in my home. And especially when this was released. When this was released on the Mega Drive, my Super Nintendo went back into the wardrobe, all packed away, and sat there for many years. Didn't get dusted down very often because I didn't need it. Once this was out, probably a year or so after it was released on the Super Nintendo, it got released on the Mega Drive, and again, this just reminds me of my friends. I can remember falling out with friends over this game, making friends over this game, fighting friends over this game, the rage quits. It was absolutely so emotional, this game. You didn't want to be the mocking boy. You didn't want to be the one that had lost to everyone in the room. And, it's so competitive. I can remember my obsession started with Street Fighter. One of my best friends at the time, Chris, his parents went to a Sunday market in a seaside town called Felixstowe every Sunday. And me and Chris every Sunday went to that market. And it wasn't to go and buy some fruit and veg or look at some knockoff toot. It was to go into the local arcade there and play Street Fighter. I can remember saving all my pocket money, spending that whole lot all on Street Fighter 2. It was every young lad's at that time obsession. I can remember being gutted it coming out on the Super Nintendo and not the Mega Drive. Not for the fact that it wasn't, you know, it's just that I wanted to play it in the home. So therefore my parents went out, and because of the upheaval of moving house, they went out and bought our family a Super Nintendo. And yeah, many nights of in a village, nothing to do, did I sit, no friends out that way, and just for hours playing Street Fighter until I got myself, I believe, quite a good player at it back then. And it's just stuck with me for all this time. Street Fighter, guys. Like I said, it follows all the way through. We got Super Street Fighter 2, which was, again, was a fantastic port on the Mega Drive. And then it moved on to the Sega Saturn. I can remember there was a bit of a lull with me with Street Fighter. You know, we still played it on the Mega Drive. But my God, when Street Fighter Alpha 2 made its work day on the Sega Saturn, me and my mates, you know, by then we was in our late teens and we were still playing this game. This game was always booted up on a night out. Everyone would meet around my house in my bedroom. We would all start hitting the drinks and we would have a few rounds of Street Fighter to get us in the party mood before we hit the town. And you know, so many memories of so many mates, a game that, you know, you lose contact with because just life just gets in the way sometimes. You know, this was before girls. This was before, you know, we all went out and settled down and got girlfriends and weren't allowed to go out and play with our mates anymore. Yeah, and that's what that reminds me of. The absolute freedom and just, you know, life was one big buzz party and playing some Street Fighter, guys. So, you know, it's got to be included. And then we move on again, more Street Fighters, and onto the Dreamcast. You know, fantastic. We've got Street Fighter Alpha 3, which I still think, I don't know why, but you know, nostalgia reasons, I still think Street Fighter Alpha 2 is my favourite. But Street Fighter Alpha 3, this was when I had a job, I had my own place, and you know, I would invite mates over, and you know, we'd sit in the living room playing these games so much. And yeah, the memories. Whenever I boot up any of the Street Fighter games, it reminds me of friends, situations. Absolutely amazing. And there you go, guys. There are my 5 emotionally attached games and series of games. I hope you've enjoyed it, guys. I'm looking forward to seeing plenty more VR responses to Dave's original response here. Absolutely fantastic. I'm now going to go and take a cold bath because I'm sweating. Until the next time, guys, I'm Sega Zombie. Goodbye.